Thank you so much for listening to The Glorious Rescue. I am Josiah Everson, reporting live here at the scene of what possibly could be 4 more years of terror, 4 more years of sheer horror, and 4 more years possibly of despotic tyranny. I'm Josiah Everson, and this is The Glorious Rescue.
Aren't you tired of feeling forced to choose between staying informed and being indoctrinated? Listen to the condensed news cycle without the lies, agendas, and confusion from the mainstream media, all while engaging in deeper discussions about the principles that have influenced our great nation. This is what rescuing America looks like. This is The Glorious Rescue.
Here we are, another episode of The Glorious Rescue. I am jumping right in because I've never been more antsy, never been more rearing to go for an episode than I am for this specific episode. We have lots to cover because I'm sick and tired. I'm sick and tired of the lies. I'm sick and tired of the agendas. I'm sick and tired of the misleading and the fear-mongering. So we're going to cover all of it. I have heaps of evidence, and I'm just going to go through all of this. And I'm not even talking about election. I'm talking about what Joe Biden talked about in his inauguration address. I'm going to be talking about all of that. I'm going to be talking about some of the lies that are propagated by the left, and we're going to move right on through that and still get to, as promised, our end of show segment where we are going to be finishing up those quotations. So buckle up, because we're getting through this. And to all of the new listeners here, because we have been growing extensively actually on the Instagram platform, Instagram, YouTube, they're going to be censoring me off of the COVID information I'm going to be giving. So go ahead, right at the bottom, you'll see probably at the bottom already, whether you're listening on Instagram, whether you're listening on Facebook, or whether you're listening on whatever platform, YouTube, it probably says some little CDC warning down there. So I'm actually going to get my information from the CDC, so that YouTube can say whatever they want, but I'm actually getting my information from the CDC. So first, I'm going to talk about Joe Biden's inauguration address. I'm going to start off by saying that it was supremely lackluster. Don't think I've really listened to a more boring speech than Joe Biden's inauguration address. The only thing entertaining about that speech was Joe Biden's little scraggly hairs at the back of his head that were whistling in the wind and making him look really dorky as he gave the entire speech. That was the only thing keeping my interest, because it was so boring. I feel like the only person struggling more to stay awake during that speech than me was Joe Biden himself. So we're going to talk about it though, but he made some very awful claims. He made some very, you really got to see his foundation that we're going to talk about, the flawed foundation that he underlaid his administration on in his speech, and then talk about his first day policies, his second day policies. What is he pushing that we kind of talked about in the last episode, but what he is now officially doing as president. So buckle up, because maybe there's the possibility of him, spending the first couple days doing these radical items, and then all of a sudden coming back. But I doubt it. So buckle up for 4 more years. Buckle up for this episode, because we're jumping right in. So first, Josiah, did you listen to all of Joe Biden's inauguration address? I did. Josiah, were you awake for the entire thing? No, I was not. I was focused for the vast majority of it, so we're going to be talking about some of it, but note that this is not all-inclusive, because again, I struggled listening to it. So just note that I'm not covering everything wrong he said. So just because I didn't mention things here and there doesn't mean that I don't disagree with it. It might just mean that I was snoozing as much as Joe Biden was in that speech. So first and foremost, we're going to be talking about one of the things that he did say, and that is that unfortunately, America is split. America has a beautiful ideal, which I do agree with, and I'm grateful for that he acknowledged that the foundation of our nation is a good foundation, and not that the foundation is wrong. But what he stated that the conflict is completely wrong. And we're going to talk about that right now. He says the split, basically, is between the American ideal, the principles of freedom, of all men and women are created equal, you know the thing.
We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
And so that ideal, America is split between the people who believe in that ideal and the evil root of racism. The problem is that is not true. Again, I ask, where is the systemic racism? Name one system, name one governmental ordinance, one law, one segment of the government, one branch of the government that shows systemic racism. I ask for. Are there racist people? Of course. If you see them, I will stand against them with you, of course, because I'm not a racist, and I hate racism. It is evil. But again, where's the systemic racism? It's just not there. What the actual struggle is in our nation, what the actual split is between the people who support the American ideal and not racism, but the other group is the group that believes that the American ideal is rooted in racism itself. That when those founders penned those beautiful words, they held slaves and they didn't believe that those same principles apply to all men, Even though they say all men, they didn't even believe that the slaves were even men. So therefore, the entire system is rooted in racism. It's just a group of white supremacists, of middle-aged white men creating a system of patriarchy, racism, bigotry in order to advance their wealth and their personal well-being. So Joe Biden is incredibly wrong to say that the split is between those who believe in the ideal and those who believe in racism. Because what it actually is, again, the people that agree with the ideal and the people that believe that the ideal is inherently evil, wrong, and it must be struck down and rebuilt. That is literally what this administration within the first 2 days has proved it is going to follow. That we're going to tear down that old system and create a new one. And we're going to get into why that is and how he does so and why it's wrong. But I just want you to note that that is inaccurate. It is wrong. Because we actually can see it in our days. Like, look at the difference between the right and the left and look at the principles they're standing on. What Joe Biden is trying to do is portray all those who don't believe and follow his and support his administration are the racists. He's literally dividing the nation upon his own policies as if you disagree with me, you are a racist because you don't believe in the American ideal, as he's trying to give this speech calling for quote-unquote unity. It's so embarrassingly evil. It's so egregiously awful, in my opinion, as well, because again, as you are calling for unity, what you are doing is saying that those who will not unite are because they are racist and because they don't believe in the American ideal. When in reality, we do. We support it. That's why we didn't vote for you. Anyways, so I wanted to start off with that concept, those principles that we do completely disagree on. Now we're going to be jumping into the first couple days of his presidency. First is Paris Peace, the Paris Peace Accord or Paris Peace Act or whatever it is. And basically it's an environmentalist pact, I should say, between multiple different countries. It is an international pact. Basically, all nations come together saying we're going to lower emissions and we're going to help the planet and climate change, blah, 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 blah. All that. The problem is it's not based in science. It hurts our economy. And really, we will follow it and hurt our own companies and hurt our own businesses, our own economy, while the other countries, like China, for instance, will not. They will not follow it. In fact, if you look at international history in general, you have a huge list of pacts that America has entered in which we have followed and the other nations have not. I think of after World War II, we put huge restrictions on Germany, per se, on military, how many military members they can have. And they actually did follow that because we had troops there monitoring that. But think of NATO, think of all these different agreements where we hold up our end of the bargain and the other countries don't, and they're allowed to prosper. We already talked about Iran coming out and already making huge steps towards nuclear warheads, developing parts. They are now currently manufacturing parts for nuclear warheads. And this is what the history of our nation is going to be for the next 4 years. It is going to be United States, America, and Americans last. It is going to be restricting our economy to support your lack of science, to make your group of people feel better about themselves at the expense of American jobs, and the American economy, and allowing other nations to prosper. Again, the Paris Peace Accord is an awful one because it doesn't actually, again, climate change, we can talk about climate change all day long, but it's unsubstantiated. I want to recommend a video to you that we don't have time to play, and that is Ted Cruz. Just look up like Ted Cruz satellite debate or something along the lines in a Senate committee. And what he did is he pushed down on a scientist saying, we have been tracking Earth's temperature for the past 40, 50, maybe 60 years, and we have not seen any spikes or dramatic lowers and trending up and downs of the Earth's temperature. And yet you're saying climate change or global warming and then climate change when it goes down because, it has to go back and forth. Rather than kind of assuming what that is, then that is that we've only had 50, 60 years to be able to track Earth's temperature. Anything else is completely irrelevant. You cannot say that this is what the Earth's temperature was way back when because of this or that. You could say it was ice, but it could have been the same arguments that you make to prove that it was ice and now it's melted over time are the same arguments you can make to say, oh, well, it was a flood. And both are actually completely logical, ice being water, and they look the same in the fossil record. So again, going back to this, climate change, evidence not substantiated, you look at scientific satellite images and tracking the temperature of the Earth, there are natural trends upward and downward, and we don't really know what those trends are because we've only been tracking it for the past 50 or 60 years. Again, we also can go into emissions and people saying that the main emissions are from us or from humans or from natural resources. Really, the main, for instance, one is carbon dioxide, another one is methane gas, and that is apparently the one that's going to, kill us all in the next 10 years, 5 years, year and a half. Joe Biden's going to kill us before climate change can get to us. But the main contributor of methane gas is actually cows. The 1.4 billion cattle on this earth, they produce 40% of the methane. Another 20 to 30% are the natural resources, coal and things like that. And another 30%, 20 to 30%, or 30 to 40% are just random sources. So yes. Also on top of that, Venus has 300 times more carbon dioxide. That's what everyone's worried about, is the carbon dioxide. And Venus is so hot that there's no water vapor. The temperature, there's molten lava all over the surface because it has 300 times more carbon dioxide. And that's what people worry about, is we're going to get so much carbon dioxide, we're going to be like Venus. But then on the other side is Mars. And it has 1% of carbon dioxide. And because of that, 1% of the carbon dioxide that Earth has, the temperatures are far below freezing. And there's atmospheric pressure so low that it would be, again, inhospitable. The point I'm trying to make here is that Earth is sat perfectly in the middle. And even if people talk about the massive amounts of carbon dioxide that we produce or we get rid of, Earth can fluctuate healthily between a vast amount. Because Venus is on one end, Mars is on the other, and we're nice and perfectly in the middle. And we fluctuate back and forth. Again, that's the way that God intended it. So there's not really any evidence for that. So again, that's about the Paris Peace Accord. He also, 100-day mask mandate. And unfortunately, I don't have too much time to get into the COVID numbers, but here's what I will say. COVID cases, 25 million COVID cases in the US, 400,000 deaths. That's according to the CDC. These numbers are according to the CDC. But if you remember, the CDC said about 6% of those COVID deaths were actually the only deaths that were caused of COVID. Of those 400,000, 94% of those did not die from COVID. They died having COVID. So only 6%, again, this is according to the CDC, only 6% of that 400,000 actually died of COVID. And therefore, there's about 24,000 COVID deaths in the United States. Still awful, of course. Our hearts ache for those people. 24,000 and 25 million cases. Last year for the flu, there were 34,000 deaths, 10,000 more deaths than basically people who have died from the flu this year. Again, last year you died from the flu, you were counted in that number. You had flu-like cases, you were counted in that. COVID, you get the flu during this past 9 months, it is counted as COVID. Those flu-like symptoms, you are counted as a positive COVID test. If you don't get tested, of course, but if you just have flu-like symptoms, you're written down as a case. If you had flu-like symptoms when you passed away, you were written down as a COVID death. So this number, this 24,000 deaths and 25 million cases, are including a lot of the normal flu deaths and cases. 24,000, 25 million. I want you to remember those for COVID 2020. 2019 in the flu, all of the flu combined had 34,000 cases. 10,000 more cases, or deaths, 34,000 deaths, and 35 million cases, 10 million more cases than COVID cases in 2020. Let's go back to 2018. There were 61,000 COVID deaths. Flu-like deaths. Deaths attributed specifically to the flu, and flu was the cause of those deaths, and 45 million cases. So this is what I want you to remember. 2018, 45 million cases. 2019, 35 million cases. COVID, 2020, 25 million cases. Actually decreasing, and this number over here with COVID would count a lot of those flu cases. Because again, you have flu-like cases, you are counted in that COVID count. Deaths, 61,000 in 2018, 2019, 34,000, and 2020 with COVID, 24,000, decreasing again. And again, that's according to the CDC, because only 6% were the cause, because there are millions of people who I'm sure die every year or over the course of a few years with the flu and don't actually get tallied as flu deaths, just like the same as COVID. So I'm comparing apples to apples like we always should. That is to get rid of the fear-mongering. That's to get rid of this whole mask mandate. There used to be a time in American history where the people were allowed to decide what they would do for personal safety, and the government didn't regulate what was safe or what they felt was right according to their own subjective sense of reality and morality. And they used to let people live based off of their personal safety and what was comfortable for them and what they believed was safe. And the government just stuck to the job of what is their job of creating an opportunity of freedom, of equal playing field, so that we can live in a land of opportunity and free opportunity, but also equal opportunity. So that, again, we have the opportunity to live safe and according to the dictates of our own conscience of what we think is safe. But again, that's over. Mask mandates are here. And for the next 100 days by the federal government. Federal government mandating what we put on our faces, what clothes we wear, basically. again, against science. Next is a shift in just a few words, a little shift in terminology that you maybe have heard, maybe you have not, but is vital to, again, the Biden administration. Again, you can tell I'm very passionate about this. I have lots of information we're trying to cruise through that I hope is helpful to you, that I know is what needs to be the message to the American people. Stop the fear-mongering, Joe Biden. Again, tragedy, what has happened. But again, let's put it into the context, comparing apples to apples, and realize that these are common occurrences, trends, whether it be climate, trends, whether it be disease. And again, it is not the government's job to mitigate those dangers, to shelter the American people from that, but to give them an opportunity to where they can maybe amass wealth to where they don't have to go to work when something like this happens, but just create a free opportunity, an equal level playing field so that we can operate as individuals according to what we think should be safe or what we believe is safe. But getting back to the shift, it used to be that the U.S. ambassador to Israel was called just that, the U.S. ambassador, quote, the U.S. ambassador to Israel. The wording changed yesterday or the day before to, quote, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Why do I say that? Is because previously, in the last administration, we were pro-Israel, and we believed that the West Bank and Gaza were Israel's land. We also would say that even prior to that, even Obama and his administration didn't blatantly come out and say that this is not Israel's land. It was kind of more so, let's kick it back to them. Definitely Bush was kind of that way. He was kind of like bemuddled in the Middle East. Let's let them decide. Obama, let's let them decide. Although he was very anti-Israel, don't get me wrong. But now it is very clear in the wording that the ambassador is to, this one ambassador is to Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza, differentiating the three, meaning that Gaza and the West Bank are now, in according to the eyes of the U.S. ambassador, no longer a part of Israel territory. Now you look at biblically, Israel has a lot more territory than just those. I'm not going to get into all that, but what I will say is that you can clearly see the anti-Israel agenda coming out that was on his very first day. Again, the mask mandate, the Paris Peace Accord. There's so much even more to cover, including, like I mentioned, the 11 million illegal immigrants that he wants to just grant amnesty to and provide a path to citizenship that I'm not necessarily against, but it hasn't even been discussed. Where's the discussion? Where's our say in that? But then also minimum wage. So I did say in the last episode that I'm going to be talking about minimum wage. I don't really honestly have too much time, so I'm just trying to cruise through this. I'm going to briefly mention minimum wage, briefly mention some of the arguments against it, why it is a bad idea, and then head into our end of show segment. So first off, I'm just going to completely get rid of this misnomer that people who are working on minimum wage are fighting for their lives, that they are the breadwinners, that they're just trying to provide a decent living. Not even a decent living, just a living for their families. Because it's simply not true. So I'll give you kind of what the information that the left gives, and that's according to the Economic Policy Institute. And they said most low-wage workers are their family's primary breadwinners. I want you to listen to this. If you're a low-wage worker, it doesn't even say minimum wage, it says low wage. So this isn't even including people just on minimum wage. So it's skewed. It's completely trying to change your bias, completely trying to shift it because it's not saying minimum wage, low wage, which if you actually look at it was substantially higher. The threshold was substantially higher than minimum wage workers. So anyways, low-wage workers are their families, most low-wage workers are their family's primary breadwinners, accounting for, listen to this, approximately 50% of total family income. Again, I'm going to read you this statistic, and I just want you to think about how misleading it is. Most low-wage workers are their family's primary breadwinners, accounting for about 50% of total family income on average. First of all, it says low wage, not minimum wage, so they're tricking you there. On top of that, they say they're their family's primary breadwinners because it's about 50% of the total family income. Just listen to it. It says 50% of that family's income, meaning there's another 50% coming from that, which means, generally speaking, what this statistic is not telling you is that it's only 50%, meaning if there's a household that is living off of a minimum wage job, it is also living off of a second minimum wage job, like a two-parent household, both working minimum wage jobs. That is substantially different than what the media or the left tries to portray of how many people are living on minimum wage, barely trying to, and it's just the single breadwinning income for the family. In fact, that actually is only about 4% of minimum wage workers, not 4% of our workforce, but all of the people on minimum wage, only 4% have that one single minimum wage income as the sole and only source of income for that household. That is according to heritage.org. Going back to this number, it says that there are 60 million people on minimum wage jobs. What they don't tell you, so let's go back, 60 million, that's 20% of the population, 300 million, 60 million of 300 million, that's like almost 20% of the population is working these minimum wage jobs, so we need to raise it for these people. But there's only 25 million households that are making minimum wage jobs, which means 60 million people, 25 million households, which means the average household that is on minimum wage income actually has about 2.5 of those minimum wage salaries in that household. Because again, you have 25 million households on it, but 60 million people. So again, average is about 2.5 minimum wage incomes on that. And again, that is across the board, across the United States. So again, very, very misleading because they're saying 60 million, but then later they say 25 million households. Do some quick math. They think we're sheep. They think we can be misled like that. And I want you to really look at those statistics and realize that that is misleading, and that is the main information, the main source that they try to quote when they talk about this being breadwinners. When again, it's only 4% of minimum wage workers. Only 4% are using that as the only source of income for that family. Here's another one. None of the minimum wage breadwinners of their families must live solely on this wage. Every single one of that 4% that only live on this apply and are eligible to receive the Earned Income Tax Credit, the EITC. You know what that means? Basically, for every dollar they earn an additional 40 cents from the EITC, assuming you have 2 children and it is the worker's family and it is the only source of income. So you make $1, you get an extra 40 cents in that tax, not a tax credit, but it's given to you. You make another 40 cents on the dollar. If, again, you are that 4%. This is a much more streamlined and better system than the idea of just raising the minimum wage. What would be much better to say that there are very few people on minimum wage jobs that are using that as the only and sole income and breadwinning money for that household. And if you are in that 4%, if that is you, then you are eligible for much better tax credits, right? That makes a lot more sense. It's a lot more streamlined, and you're already eligible for that. And that's according to the Hoover Institute. You are anyone who is in that category is eligible for that. The national, here's another example, another reason why we should not. First of all, it's useless. It's not actually going to help the people in need when there's already processes in place. It's not as big of a problem as people say it is, and there's already processes in place to help those people. Secondly, the massive amount of damage it's going to do to the job market. According to the National Small Business Association, they stated that a 5% increase in minimum wage would be a loss of 1.5 million jobs, 2.5% loss of all minimum wage jobs. Like I said, you take that last one, 60 million jobs, minimum wage jobs that you saw from the last statistic, you take 2.5% of that, which is the loss, that's 1.5 million jobs lost if we raise the minimum wage by 5%. Joe Biden wants to raise the federal minimum wage by 50%. Imagine what that will do to the job market. You're a small business owner. What are you going to do? You're going to pay 2 people at a much higher rate, or you're going to pay one person even higher than that, get rid of the other person and pay one person a really good wage to do both jobs. Now, Josiah, a longer episode? Are we doing a longer episode? We are absolutely doing a little bit longer of an episode. I don't really have much else to cover in this segment, but we are going to head over into an end of show segment. But before I do, this is not even covering, like I said, those 11 million illegal immigrants. We haven't even talked about that discussion. I barely scratched the surface on the minimum wage discussion. I barely scratched the surface on the discussion about Israel and all of that. Barely scratched the surface on COVID. I hope that gave you some better perspective. Barely touched the surface on climate change, but I hope this helps give you that general overview, some statistics that you can maybe write down, or you can come back and reference this episode when you have different discussions. We were able to talk about a wide variety of topics that are apparently now going to be the priority of this next administration for the next 4 years, so that you have something to fall back on. An episode that is hopefully very helpful and informative to you. And now, again, I want to move into a segment that is more inspiring. Not just to be quote-unquote motivational, but to help realize what is truly at stake here. What's truly at stake is not just raising the minimum wage. What's truly at stake is not just more citizens in the U.S., but it's about those fundamental principles, those foundational ideas that are integral to the success of our nation. And that's what we're going to be talking about in an end of show segment of The Vast Past. Welcome back to another segment of The Vast Past. I want to say that we are actually going through our United States history kind of chronologically as best as we can, not necessarily by topic, so it may seem a little bit scattered. If you want to go back to the last episode and skip to the end of show segment, we did that as well. So you're kind of coming right in the middle. We're going to try to wrap it up today. And then I have some very exciting end of show segments that I've lined up for us in the future as we continue to move on that I'm, again, very excited about. But that is what the segment is going to be today. I highly recommend you go back and look at previous episodes. I think of episode 42 where we dove really deep, more deep, at least I should say, into the biblical founding of our nation. I highly recommend you go back there. Definitely going back through those end of show segments or even the day-to-day news if you want to kind of get an update on those current events, the things you missed here and there. You can always check the descriptions to all of our new listeners. You can read the description, see what they're about. And also you can see what the end of show segment's about. If you're interested in it, skip to somewhere in the half portion or maybe the 3/4 portion, and you can get into and delve into these deeper discussions that I do believe are so important. But I want you to comment right now. I have an idea to drop a bloopers reel, and I don't have quite enough bloopers just yet. I actually do have a lot of bloopers, but I've been deleting them. Obviously, I edit them out, and I only have a couple. So over the next several episodes, do you want to see me be cutting out and saving those bloopers, those mess ups that I have, and giving you a highlight reel, a blooper reel somewhere in the next couple weeks or maybe couple months or whatever? Let me know in the comments right now if you do want that blooper reel. Also, let me know what kind of content do you want to see more of? Do you want to see more of these end of show segments? Do you want to see more maybe out and about in public, obviously once COVID's over, talking about these discussions? Just let me know what kind of content you're looking for, and I would greatly appreciate it. So we ended off somewhere around Tocqueville. I know we mentioned that basically the American Republic will last as long as and until the day that Congress realizes basically it can bribe us with our own tax money. We talked about Abraham Lincoln, more concerned about who he was than who his grandfather was and the kind of man he was. Theodore Roosevelt said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick. You will go far." And this is, I think, in regards to foreign policy, a very good policy. I think Trump kind of had this idea. Trump was not like Roosevelt. If Roosevelt was president, or if he was like Donald Trump, or if he was running for president in 2020 or 2024, he would be much more controversial than even Donald Trump. He kind of was like that what's a good expression, the bull in the China house or something like that. And he literally had a large naval fleet painted completely white, the Great White Fleet, and had them travel all around the nation, all around the world, our beautiful American white fleet, just to show our power, that big stick, speak softly and carry a big stick. So anyways, Trump, I do believe, kind of took that for the foreign policy, which I do actually think was a good idea. William Douglas, who was an FDR appointee to the Supreme Court, he was very liberal, but he was very passionate about human rights or constitutional rights. And again, I do not agree with the vast majority of his decisions on the Supreme Court, but he said a couple different things. He said, "Free speech is not to be regulated like diseased cattle and impure butter. The audience that hissed yesterday may applaud today, even for the same performance." Basically saying people can be completely wrong. They can be flopping all over the place. But that is their right. That is their freedom, the free speech that we have in our nation, and it's not to be regulated. Because if you regulate it, it's like you're treating it like a disease, something that needs to be cut out. That is a statement that is very applicable to today and the suppression of free speech that we see. He also said, "Since when have we Americans been expected to bow submissively to authority and speak with awe and reverence to those who represent us?" Kind of giving us the reminder that these people are not, yes, they are our authority, but it is, again, by the consent of the governed, that they only have the power, that which we grant them. And that we, the people, again, are the government, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. I love what Mark Twain said. This is just more humorous. He said, "Loyalty to the country, always. Loyalty to the government, when it deserves it." And Thomas Jefferson made a similar statement when he talks about, I believe it was Thomas Jefferson, I may be completely wrong on that, but he talks about government being the beast and it needs to be chained and tamed because of the evil that government can be. To the nation, the patriotism in our hearts, burning passion to protect those ideals, always. But a government that's tyrannical, should we applaud a government like that? Absolutely not. John Kennedy said, "All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin, and therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words," and he says in German, "Ich bin ein Berliner." I am a Berliner. This was very, very important, and you have to understand a lot of the context when he made this statement. He was standing at the Berlin Wall. On one side was the free side, the west side, where people could go up to the wall and spray graffiti and walk up to it. And on the other side, the wall was perfectly clean, beautifully white. Because if you got even near the wall, you were shot dead because you were not allowed of the east side, the communist side of Berlin. And there was a wall separating the two, to which John F. Kennedy was referring to those people over there saying, I'm with you, I'm a Berliner. And again, America stands with you. Reagan then, years later, came out and said it even more directly when he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. George Bush, when talking about terrorists, said, you are either with us or against us. And this was his message after 9/11. And he said so very, very bluntly and very particularly that if you are not against us, you are for us. And if you are not for us, helping us catch these individuals, then you are marked down as an enemy against us. Lastly, I'll wrap up with another one of his statements, saying, to those of you who received honors, awards, and distinctions, I say well done. And to the C students, I say, you too can be president of the United States. A funny quotation, of course, George Bush talking about and pointing out that he was a C student, but that you can still be president. And that really is the beautiful thing about the American experiment, is that it doesn't matter where you are and how smart you are. Obviously, there are guidelines and restrictions to being the president. Obviously, if you are smarter, that's probably better. But anyone in the United States, any United States citizen, obviously following the qualifications, can become president of the United States. Because really, we are not a country run by the elite. We are a country led by the people, consent of the governed, not a democracy, but a constitutional republic, a federal republic where we, the people, get to elect people who are representatives of us, and any one of us can be one of those representatives. So I hope that was a good and encouraging end of show segment for you. A way to end that even though the world may seem it's a crumbling, it is not. And again, even though it seems like these next 4 years are going to be awful, which they possibly will be, remember that, again, we are in a beautiful country, and let's rest our faith in the fact that these are beautiful principles, biblical principles. And because they are rested in biblical principles, they are then eternal principles. Because again, they're based on the word of God that we do talk about. Again, I recommend episode 42 specifically if you want that end of show segment talking about the biblical founding. But rest your faith in that. Rest your faith in the principles and not just in politics, not just in the president. Because I guarantee you, you will be let down. Anyways, I thank you so much for continuing to listen in. We will be back here on Tuesday with all the latest as always. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on post notifications if you're listening on the YouTube channel. Subscribe on any platform you are listening to. It is always greatly appreciated. The most appreciated is always sharing these episodes. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Josiah Iverson, and this is The Glorious Rescue.